Hello, good afternoon and a warm welcome to you all. I'm Jocelyn Shaw, Corporate Portfolio Change Manager at Health Education England, and I'd like to extend thanks for joining the NHS Project Futures Festival today. Just before I hand you over to our key speaker, Dr. Ruth Murray Webster, may I just let you know the format of the virtual festival. You'll see on the right of the screen there's a panel containing a chat function, Q&A and poll. The chat is perhaps obvious, and the Q&A is for you to put questions to Ruth as you think of them, if you would like to, of course. There will also be a couple of poll questions throughout the presentation, so when prompted by Ruth, you can head to the polls, which are just alongside the chat and Q&A functions, to submit your responses. A festival game code will have appeared at the beginning, and you'll also get a code at the end of the session. Towards the end of Ruth's presentation, there will be a Q&A session, so please feel free to vote on each other's questions, with those questions with the most votes appearing at the top. Now, to introduce our key speaker for the session, Dr. Ruth Murray Webster is recognised as a leader of project-based organisational change and risk management, performing roles as a practitioner, advisor, facilitator, researcher and author. She's a Director of Potentiality UK and Associate Fellow at the University of Oxford Side Business School. Ruth's doctoral research focused on organisational change from the perspective of the recipients of change. She has co-authored numerous books on the people aspects of risk management and was lead editor of the Apm Body of Knowledge 7th edition in 2019 and Managing Successful Programmes 5th edition in 2020. Ruth was awarded an honorary fellowship of the Association for Project Management in 2013 for her services to risk and change. The synergies between these two disciplines are what continue to drive Ruth's thinking, writing and practice. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Ruth to the stage.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. That was realised what a comprehensive bio I'd given to you for my introduction. I think so. Nothing more I think to say about me other than I think the reason for me being part of this today and for being invited is because I was the lead editor of both the Apm Body of Knowledge 7th edition and of Managing Successful Programmes 5th edition. And so I've been asked to talk about those two publications in part, but what I want to really do is pose some wider questions about how guides and methods like Apm Body Knowledge and Managing Successful Programmes, how do they really help us in achieving beneficial change in our specific situations? You know, what are the essential practices and skills, and what can we tailor to meet the unique challenges of our situation when we're working in a Vuca world? So I'm going to explore a couple of main aspects of that, about making wise choices and maybe some responses to Vuca. And throughout, I want to try to engage you as much as possible and learn a little bit, a snapshot of the sort of things that you're working on. So I'm going to be using polls throughout to do that. And so, I mean, without further ado, we've got a couple of poll questions coming up. So the first one, what I'd like you to do is tell me, would you describe your work in project-based planned change? Would you describe it as a project? And I've put an APM definition of a project there on the slide. Would you describe your work as a programme? And that's the APM definition of programme, or a portfolio, again, the APM definition of portfolio. Or actually, would you say that the labels we use can be quite misleading and your choice would be we shouldn't get hung up on them? So when you get the results in, Jocelyn, could you let me know what they are?
Absolutely, yeah. I think they've just started to come through now.
Excellent.
Okay, so a couple of flitting about, but the majority lies with the portfolio at the moment.
Okay.
That's on 44%.
Right, okay, so lots of people managing multiple projects, multiple programmes. Is that shifting? Do we have
They certainly are.
Oh, right, okay.
So yeah, we've got roughly a third it did jump to for a project, and the same for a program. But yeah, certainly at the moment, it's the majority is with a portfolio, with only 2% being the final option.
Interesting. So obviously there are differences between projects and programs and portfolios, and as professionals, you know, we need to be able to understand and deal with those. But you know, I feel quite strongly that we've had a few decades of definitions debates that are perhaps not always that useful, and what is really important is that we focus on delivering solutions that bring the desired value for stakeholders. So I'm going to talk about project-based work in this talk, and hopefully, you know, that will you'll be able to resonate with that, whether you are actually leading a project, a program, a portfolio, or indeed if you don't care. So thank you, that's useful. Let's move on to the next one then. So what I'm interested in here is just to understand what methods or guides that you've actively used in your work, let's say in the last year, and you can tick more than one. So, you know, maybe you're using Apm Body of Knowledge or other Apm guides. You know, Apm have specific guides for risk, benefits, portfolio, lots of other guides. Maybe you're using Prince2 or Prince2 Agile. Maybe you're using Managing Successful Programs, Agile Change, maybe something else, maybe none. There is a particularly crowded marketplace for methods and guides that I think as professionals we all really need to navigate. Lots of really capable people with good things to say, but it can get quite confusing, I think, to work out what to use and what not to use. So how's that looking, Joss?
So they're still adjusting slightly as more people are voting, but the majority at the moment lies with Prince2 or Prince2 Agile at 32%, with the next largest on Managing Successful Programs at 23.7%, and then the Apm is just higher than the Agile Change, 15 and 10%.
Okay, thank you. And it's useful to hear that. Obviously, it is a crowded marketplace. The business case for all of these guides and methods does rely on you know, the organisation that produces it claiming that there's something about it that's unique for practice. And of course, you know, that can be a problem because they can't all be unique. There's lots that's common in all of these areas. And so as we you know, navigate through this and try to you know, do the best to deliver value from our project-based work, that can be a challenge. So thank you. Now let me move on then and say just a few things about first the Apm Body of Knowledge and then about MSP 5th edition. I've chosen some high-level messages from two obviously quite thick books. So I just want to share those, but then, you know, really spend a lot of the time reinforcing what's common, the things that transcend all methods and all guidance, and the things that whatever you call your work or whatever methods you use matter. Now, the body of knowledge, Apm Body of Knowledge, of course, is not intended to be a method in any way at all. Apm will call it the foundational knowledge resource for the chartered profession. So, you know, it lays out the breadth of our profession. It talks about project-based working, so it covers projects, programs and portfolios. And I think that one of the things that myself and Darren Dalcher, who was my co-editor, felt strongly about when we worked on this in, like, it was 2018, published in 19, was that we really needed to sort of nail the strategic context. I put there, you know, that it's benefits and change before schedules and contracts. And that's not because schedules aren't important and contracts aren't important, they're clearly vital. But that if we forget, you know, the benefits and the beneficial change that we're trying to deliver, that's obviously not good for our investors and our stakeholders. So we really did focus on strategic context in this edition. But I think the part of the body of knowledge that many have recognised as being a departure, I guess, from previous editions, is that we really wanted to put out there that individuals and leaders have choices to make in the way that they organise to deliver that beneficial change. We use the terminology of linear life cycles, iterative life cycles, hybrid life cycles. And we did that because we tried, I think weren't always successful because I see it all the time, but we tried to sidestep an oversimplified waterfall versus agile rhetoric. You know, just really to reinforce that projects, and particularly major projects and programs, need organizational design in the same way that operations does. So leaders have choices about the way that they go forward to deliver the particular piece of work, and we wanted to recognize that. And obviously Apm Body of Knowledge, because it's broad, it touches on, you know, lots of things. So, you know, 4 chapters, 12 sections, 64 discrete topics that go from some of those topics around implementing strategy, you know, through people, behaviours, and right through to planning and control and deployment. So Apm Body of Knowledge, it's not a method. It is, I guess, what you call a guide, whereas managing successful programs is different. It is intended to be a method. Now, there's a real paradox at the heart of managing successful programs, because on the one hand, the whole logic, I guess, for the MSP method is to enable organizational agility, is to say, when you set off on a large, complex program of work, there's an awful lot you don't know, and therefore, by definition, a program life cycle is incremental. And what you're trying to do is enable that ability to be flexible and to pivot where necessary, but also to do that within a context of really strong governance and decision making. So that's what MSP attempts to do. And what you can see on the screen there is the main figure from MSP that shows the many-to-many relationship between the 7 principles, which are in the outer ring, the 7 themes, which are really governance themes, in the middle ring, and then the 7 processes, which are in the centre. If some of you know MSP of old, I guess a number of you said that you were using it. So you'll find that in the 5th edition, there are fewer compulsory documents, fewer prescribed practices, much more opportunity to tailor within the organising framework. So let me now move on and touch on another thing from the title of this talk. So I was asked to talk about projects, programs and portfolios in a Vuca world. And, you know, this is a term that it's become quite popular, although it's been around for years, but certainly one that in both Apm Body of Knowledge and MSP was featured. Apparently, the first people to talk about Vuca world were the US Army War College in the early 1990s. They used it to describe their perspective of the context after the Cold War. So, that there was, much more unpredictable speed or size of change, so volatility, much more that, people didn't know, that the problems were much more systemic in nature, so simple analysis wasn't going to lead to the right answer, and a lot of ambiguity and different people interpreting the same information in different ways. And so they coined this term Vuca context or Vuca world. Now, when Darren and I were working on Apm Body of Knowledge, there was great interest in this idea of the Vuca world for project-based work. Our view then and now is that we didn't really intend for Vuca to be used as an acronym. My view is that it's not actually that useful to suggest that projects could actually differentiate between what's volatile and what's uncertain and what's complex and what's ambiguous, but rather to use Vuca world as short form for flagging what is really an increasingly vulnerable and unpredictable context for our project-based work. So, that was the intention, although later on in this talk, you'll see that I do also have an idea to share with you about how we might respond to the VUAC of Vuca world. So having built up, a bit about Apm Body of Knowledge, a bit about MSP, a bit about Vuca world, where do we go from this? So for me, there's a few things on this slide, but, under the heading of wise choices. And it seems to me that we always need to make wise choices about how best to structure and organise our project-based work, depending on a number of things. So I'm going to suggest depending on 3 things. And I'll talk about these briefly, and then we've got some polls on this too. So, the first thing is, what is it that you're trying to deliver? The physical attributes of the solution, the benefits that you're delivering. Are you delivering a physical thing? Are you delivering a system? Are you developing a piece of knowledge? Is it a combination of those things? There isn't one size fits all. So what you're trying to deliver will tell you a lot about what some of the appropriate choices are about life cycles and techniques that you would use. The second thing that we need to think about to make wise choices are the relative priorities of the objectives that we're going after and the appetite for risk associated with those things. So the little image on the right-hand side is actually from operations management, but applied to project-based working. So it's sort of an extension of the idea of the iron triangle, in that there are some things that we're trying to achieve that are pretty much givens, and that the appetite for risk, that our willingness to tolerate variation from our target is very small. There are other things that we're going after on a best efforts basis, but that we're prepared to trade for other things. So, some of you might be, driven by delivery speed. You might be driven by cost, you might be driven by product or service quality, and different things, and we need to understand that. And the third area, and this is an area where I've done a fair bit of work over the years, and if later on this week you are going to listen to Stephen Carver's session, Steve's brilliant talk, is based on this third area and my work with Harvey Mailer and Steve and Neil Turner on sources of complexity. So, the third thing that you need to understand if you're going to make a wise choice is what's making your project-based work complex. What's the primary source of that? Is it because what you're doing is big and fast? It's got structural complexity. Is it complex because of people and power and politics and conflict? Has it got socio-political complexity? Or is it complex because there's a huge amount of emergence? You know, it's that Vuca context again. There's a huge amount of risk and change that you're anticipating. Or actually, is it all of those things? So let's just take a minute now and see what you're thinking. So we've got three polls about those three areas. So the first one, so just very quickly, is your current project or program or portfolio of those things mainly delivering physical assets, systems, knowledge, or a combination of more than one of the above? I think that's going to be mainly the last one, isn't it, Joss?
So, yeah.
It's really small in the top of my screen, the poll, but I can see that there's a big old bar on the bottom there. So yeah, so most of you involved in delivering change that's a combination of physical assets, systems, and knowledge, or at least 2 out of 3. I think a few coming in that's mainly just maybe one of them. Oh yeah, I can see that moving a little there. Perfect. So, second question. So if you think about your current work and recognizing that this might be a little bit tricky if you're managing a whole range of things, but maybe just pick the one that's top of your mind. What's the driving objective for your current project? Is it delivery speed, so doing it as fast as possible? Delivery reliability, which is about keeping your promises on timescales, so not necessarily as fast as possible, but a reliable timescale? Is it driven by cost objectives? Is it driven by product or service quality objectives? Is it driven by the need to be flexible and adaptable? Or is it driven by the need to have really strong relationships? So how's that looking, Joss?
So at the moment, just a couple of adjustments, but the clear winner on this one is the product or service quality, and that's currently about 42%, with the next highest on delivery speed, that's 22, with the lowest being reliability and flexibility, both on about 4.5%.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, usually it's as fast as you can, as cheap as you can, and as good as you can. Thank you. And then the third one, and this might be a new area to you, but just to explain what we're looking at here, you know, sometimes projects feel complex because of structural issues. It's big, it's fast, it's got lots of interdependencies. You know, the planning and controlling the project is a massive big deal. Some projects feel complex because the people issues are really tricky, and people, power, politics, maybe lots of conflict that's going on, and that's what we call socio-political complexity. Sometimes projects are complex because everything's changing. It's difficult to nail anything down, what we call an emergent complexity, and maybe you're experiencing complexities in more than one area, and that's the fourth option, which from what I can see is very small, but seems to be the biggest one.
Yeah, we've got nearly 60% of people with complexities in more than one area.
More than one area, yeah. And how do the other three look? The other structural, socio-political, and emergent, Joss? What are those percentages?
So about a third on socio-political complexity, and then we've got the structural on about 5.5, and then emergent complexity just on 3, nearly 4.
Okay, thank you. And you know, that's interesting because using there's a sort of a diagnostic that sits behind this, but what I find over and over again is that although, you know, people have got projects that are large and are going to spend a lot of money and do need to go at pace, the complexity that's perceived as being the most difficult to manage is the socio-political complexity. And of course, it's interesting because when we look at the methods and the guides that exist to guide our work, they're predominantly responses to structural complexity. They're helping us to plan and to organise, and not necessarily dealing with some of those issues of power and allegiances and complex stakeholder relationships or complex emergence. So that raises for me some questions about how where guides and methods can be really, really useful and be vital, but where they're necessary but not sufficient. So thank you for sharing that. I think if there was one thing that we were trying to get away from when we were preparing Body of Knowledge 7, was suggesting, as I said before, that the structural choices we can make are a binary waterfall versus agile sort of set of choices, or project versus program, something that feels very, very binary. And because I've got the floor today, I'd say that's that's lazy and it's quite dangerous, and I see lots of evidence of people following approaches that are really not fit for purpose for the work that they're trying to do. And few project-based endeavours warrant an either-or approach, in my experience. So when we use this language, we risk not being wise. And I was talking to a colleague of mine at Oxford, Professor Harvey Mailer, the other week, and he was saying, sometimes we end up being woke, not wise. And now I had to look at what woke meant. Might be something to do with my age, but a sense that sometimes if we there are fashions and fads around projects, and some of the rhetoric is that if you're not following a particular agile methodology, or you're not following this guide, that you're so out of touch and so wrong. And we're really trying to get away from that view and to making wise choices. So I'm just going to sort of continue and talk a little bit more about what I mean by wise choices here. Okay, so what I've done is I just sort of picked out here some of the choices that you might make to progress your work. So if what you're managing is the delivery of a physical thing, a piece of equipment, it could be a building, but it's a physical asset that you're delivering, and you're doing that to a predefined specification. So your stakeholders are very clear what the requirements are, what the design is, what it needs to achieve in terms of specification and quality, and that you're charged with doing that as quickly and as cheaply as you can, but without compromising quality. Then a linear approach, or what people have historically called a waterfall approach, is exactly the right thing to do. It's that there is, critical path analysis, isn't superseded. There's a place for it, and the place for it is when you're trying to do something like that. But there are lots of other scenarios, aren't there? So if you think then, well, maybe, let's building this up, your work's not doing that. at all. What you're trying to develop is an innovative solution to a problem. It could be a system, it could be a knowledge piece of work. It needs to be something absolutely that works for stakeholders. So the driving objective is about meeting those needs, but it's not possible to define the specification precisely in advance. They're the scenarios where an iterative approach using agile ways of working are like it's made for that and works really well there. There's a bit more space on my page which suggests that there are some other scenarios than that. Often, you know, some of you said that the thing that was driving your objectives was actually delivery speed, that we need to deliver a solution fast, and speed is relatively more important than anything else. The theory of constraints, or what you might know as critical chain, or some people would know it as resource critical path, with a linear life cycle is absolutely the tried and tested way to do things fast if speed is relatively more important than anything else. Because what the theory of constraints is doing by definition is identifying the constraint, is identifying the blockage, the weakest link, if you like, in the chain, and then is strengthening that link, and you systematically go through doing that. So, you know, some of you might be using critical chain approaches. That they can be quite tricky to use because we know that we need to establish the right conditions, the right culture for the team to work well, because the whole idea in the theory of constraints is that we plan using optimistic estimates and where it's okay to be late. So if you're in a culture where you're padding your estimates like mad because it's not okay to be late, and then actually what you're doing is confounding the ability to go fast. So you know, that's a third option there, a third wise choice that you might make depending on your projects. Sometimes what we're trying to do, the value that we're delivering through our projects, is actually improving an existing process. You know, some very complex processes in your organization. I'm sure many of you are working on either trying to eliminate waste, make those processes more efficient or more effective. And that's where lean techniques, perhaps combined with agile ways of working, are really proven. So some of you might be using lean techniques or Lean Six Sigma. I'm old enough to know those techniques from when it was called total quality management in the 1980s, but many of you maybe were not born then. But again, you know, there's very specific and tried and tested ways of planning work and controlling work if what you're trying to do is improve a process. And then there's obviously the program view, because you know, often we, you know, the programs or the portfolios that we're managing have got projects within them or work within them that really warrant a hybrid or multimodal approach. So within a single project, there's quite a lot being written and said about hybrid approaches now, which is great, because few projects are a pure linear approach or a pure iterative approach. There might be, you might have use an agile way of working in a design phase, and then in a build phase you move to a waterfall type life cycle, or in a program. Axilos, in managing successful programs, use this term multimodal approach to say that, you know, within the program there could be projects that are using any one of these approaches and techniques within, but that we're combining that within the same governance to make sure that then the incremental nature of the program that pulse as you work through multiple tranches of work actually works, and that the decisions that you make are truly led by a benefit risk whole life cost trade-off. Okay, so, and a lot of words on that slide, and a number of ideas, and maybe you're thinking, yeah, that there are choices there that I am making now. Maybe you're thinking there are some choices there that maybe I'm not making now, but it's in my gift to make them. Or maybe you're thinking, well, maybe making choices about the approaches that we use are above my pay grade. They're not my choices. Somebody else decides, and I just follow process. What I would say is, wherever you are on your journey as a project professional, whether you're starting out, whether you're a seasoned professional, if you take nothing else from today, is just to, just take that challenge to be really clear where different approaches to the work, different methods, different guides, different techniques, which ones work best depending on what it is you're trying to deliver, whether it's a physical thing or not, what the relative priorities objectives are, and what the complexities are. Really see it as a choice, and hone your skills. If it's not your choice, hone your skills for influencing up. If you feel you're being guided down a path that makes little sense for the team and the work to be done. To quote a truism, there is no one size fits all. So certainly I'm hoping that before the end of my career, I see many more wise choices being made in project-based work, and don't hear as I go around the bazaars and different organisations to people having a waterfall versus agile debate. I live in hope of that. So, wise choices was the first thing that I wanted to talk about. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is actually related to Vuca. So, although my personal preference would always be to tend to just consider Vuca as a flag for those increasingly vulnerable and unpredictable contexts, then there are a number of models out there that consider each part of Vuca. And indeed, I've been to a few conferences in the last few months where people have been adding on, different letters and the Vuca-D model and the whole loads of variations on this. So what I thought might be useful today, just for you to reflect upon, is and it's based on the work of a guy called Bob Johansson. So it's quite a few years old now, 2007. This was published, but I think it's there's a huge amount of value in this response, and what I like about it is that it applies directly to any method or any guidance that you might think of. So whether you're working with APM products or Prince or MSP or Agile Change or anything else, then this works. So I just want to talk you through that, and then we've got a little breakout that comes shortly, and another poll question at the end related to this. So Vuca responses according to Bob Johansson. So the first thing that he would say is that if you've got volatility, then you counter volatility by really holding the vision. This phrase, vision rises above volatility. Often we've got things that are changing unpredictably, and it's vital to keep a really clear focus on overall vision, because knowing where we're heading is really, really important when there's a huge amount of turbulence coming at you from the outside. Sometimes you do need to pivot and the vision is no longer relevant, but often, it's about just holding where we're headed in stormy seas, if you like. So just keeping, as practitioners, that relentless emphasis on the objectives and the objectives that matter the most. I am a real pedant when I'm working with clients and when I'm leading project-based work myself, to say understanding the relative priorities of your objectives, the risk appetite associated with those, and really keeping focused on those is vital. So as Bobby Hansen said, when things are changing unpredictably around you, keep your eyes on the goal, and that seems to me to be sound advice. Okay, so the response to uncertainty, he would claim to be understanding. There's obviously lots that's uncertain. There's lots that we don't know. Some of it we don't know, but it is knowable. And it's, I was reading something in an article in the Financial Times this morning, yet another article about COVID and the exercise that's going on in Wuhan at the moment with the World Health Organization going through an exercise of, and it's probably more about politics and diplomacy than it is about science, but understanding maybe where this current virus originated from. And there was a quote from a guy, a virologist, in this article that went along the lines of, when are we going to stop pretending that we didn't know that these sorts of viruses were just going to happen, that it was completely understood that these sorts of viruses would cross into humans and had the potential to create havoc. A really good example of where there's things that are uncertainty, but we can know about them. And so understanding helps us to reduce uncertainty. Not everything's knowable, absolutely not, for sure. And it's always difficult, even if you can know a fact, to know maybe what the impact of something would be. But if we invest in increasing our knowledge and our understanding, that might be about exploring, about researching, it might be about experimenting and trying different things out. But as project professionals, really trying to get a deeper grasp of what's going on, and so we actually perceive less uncertainty. It allows us to move forward with greater confidence. Okay, so vision rises above volatility, understanding reduces uncertainty, and the third one is that clarity counters complexity. So I'm really interested in this idea of complexity in projects and programs. What makes things complex? What do we feel is complex? But one of the things that we can do is we can start to understand it. We can start to just get some clarity about the things, rather than seeing things, this is just really complex, but we can't dissect it. Just to start to cut through some of the confusing and maybe unnecessary detail and focus on the core elements of the situation. What's the situation? How can we address it? Some situations are inherently complex. We talk about wicked problems, things that have both technical and behavioural complexity. We know that we need to think about whole systems and be able to map whole systems, clarifying, even if that's just mapping the network of relationships and interdependencies between those. So there's lots we can do just to try and cut through this complexity and get some clarity. And that doesn't mean that we can make everything simple, but when we're faced with complexity, we can seek to simplify wherever we possibly can. And then the fourth area, ambiguity. So ambiguity is defined in the Vuca sense as being ambiguity because different people have got very different takes, very different levels of maybe understanding of a particular situation. You're not going to get everybody to agree all of the time. So what agility is a response to this, because what it does, it retains the freedom and flexibility to respond to quickly changing circumstances. So I don't want you to, I'm not, agility here is not to be confused with capital A, agile ways of working, but agility in terms of keeping options open and preparing a range of potential responses, you know, thinking about multiple potential futures and having responses to all of those. So as the situation unfolds and as ambiguity resolves into certainty, you actually know which path to take because you've considered multiple paths. So I find this this work quite useful. You know, it's not my work, I'm sharing someone else's, but I like it because I think it cuts through all of the methods and guidance, or it's all wrapped around all of the methods and guidance because they're all full of techniques and ideas to help you do these things, you know, to help you create the vision and hold the vision, you know, where, you know, engaging your stakeholders around the vision. You know, all the methods and guidance have something to say about improving knowledge and understanding. And, you know, whether we give that a risk label or a knowledge label or a learning label, then actually increasing our understanding is part and parcel of all of those guides and methods. And I think they also have lots to be said about being clear about the system, being clear about all those systemic relationships, either between elements of the work or of the people involved. And they all have something to say about planning contingencies. So not just amounts of money in contingency, but also thinking about contingency plans, about scenarios, and what's your plan B, and maybe also your plan C, not just your plan A. So that's a lot of me talking. What I would like us to do now is to go into breakout rooms. I'm sure Joss will tell you how to do that in a minute. But when you're in your breakout, what I'd like you to do, and yeah, we've got lots of time. We've got lots of time here, so we can have the 15 minutes in a breakout room. What I'd like you to do with your colleagues in there is discuss the things that you'd change to make your work easier to manage in a Vuca world. And we're going to do this around the idea of 3 wishes. So, you know, have a chat about the things that you think you could change to make your work easier. And then each one of you will get 3 wishes. And we're going to do this through menti.com. So if you've got your phone or a tablet or something, and at the end of the breakout, just log into menti.com using the code that's on there, and in there you'll be able to just you know, just give either in, you know, 1 word or a few words your three wishes, and then we'll be able to see all of the outputs that have come together as a word cloud, and let's see if we can make some sense of that shortly. So I make that 35 minutes past. So if we stay in the breakouts until 10 to the hour, please, and then do the poll, and then we'll be ready to look at those outputs and pick up again at about 5 to the hour.
Thank you, Ruth. If you can just head to the links which are in the description box underneath the main presentation screen, you'll find 2 links there based on the letter of your surname. Any problems, please drop notes in the chat and we'll try to assist. Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully that was some time to have a good discussion. You'll be able to see on my screen now the link to Menti, but just to say that we have a new code. So the code that you need to use to register your 3 wishes is 3961642. So I'll just give you a few moments to do that, and then hopefully the technology will work and we'll be able to look at a word cloud of some of the things that you were talking about. Whilst you're doing that, we have had 3 great questions in the Q&A already that I will address all 3 of those. But also, if there are questions, we obviously can't debrief from the breakout rooms from every room. But if there are questions or comments that you have that were arising in that discussion and you want to put them in the Q&A, then I'd be really happy to address those as time allows. Okay. Don't think we've got any chat of people not being able to. So hopefully the new code's working, although it's still just showing that 4 people have oh no, we've got lots more coming here. 24. That's great. So I'm just going to give it another minute or so, and then we'll have a look. We'll have a look at what we've got. Oops, wasn't supposed to happen. Okay, brilliant. I think I've probably failed to use this technology properly, but I'm just wondering what we can do with this. Let's see. Here we go. So I'm not sure if how clearly you can see that, but really clear, some really clear winners there in the middle of the 3 things that would make your work easier would be somehow greater motivation, greater engagement. There's also communication, understanding, clarity. About what you're trying to do and get stakeholder understanding and buy into that, and that seems to be fairly high up there on some of the wishes, and linked to that collaboration, shared vision. I love doing this because rarely are the things that are going to make our work easier to do with a better system to do critical path analysis, or a better method to do something. There are some things about maybe sharing test methods here or some other more tangible things, but at the heart of what it takes to do project-based well is largely human. It's about, you know, people coming together, having a really clear vision and sense of what the work is about and what those relative priorities are, and being able to be motivated to move towards those. So thank you. I'm just going to leave that now, and thank you to those who contributed, and hopefully you had a good discussion. So I'm just going to go back to my slideshow now, and I just have one closing slide, and then I'll come to your questions. So I think that there were a few things that I wanted to do today, and you know, obviously as someone who has you know, worked quite intensely over the last few years on methods and guides with Body of Knowledge 7 and MSP 5th edition, you know, I absolutely see the value in those things. But I think that, you know, as professionals, we've got some bigger questions to ask about how those methods and guides actually help us going forward. So, you know, these are my final thoughts, and then I'll address your questions. Obviously, we use projects, programs and portfolios to deliver vital change and benefits, you know, to our investors, to our stakeholders, and that's, you know, that's obvious. That's why we're doing it. But sometimes the how we go about it can almost, you know, become more of a debate about why we're doing something in the first place. So, you know, let's hold that vision. There are obviously many guides and methods, lots and lots of advice out there, and it's all intended to help and not hinder. I would say, you know, there are some really smart people with really smart things to say, but, you know, rarely does any one book or any one advisor have all of the right answers. And for me, it's incumbent on us as professionals to, you know, to consume what's out there, and then to really try and make those wise choices as a result of that. You know, beware of a one size fits all. If you are, you know, some organizations do exactly the same sorts of projects all the time. You know, they're building infrastructure, or they're developing new systems. You know, they're developing pharmaceuticals, or, you know, they're doing clinical trials, or so some organizations have portfolios of projects that are very similar, but that's not where you are. You have got a huge variety of things going on. So beware of one size fits all, and think about those different parameters that you need to consider. You know, not just what you're delivering, what the relative priorities of objectives are, what some of the complexities are, and then you can start to get the best from the advice. And, you know, my closing thoughts are, in a Vuca world, you know, it is changeable out there. It is complex out there. Whether it's getting more so or not, I'm not sure, but certainly it feels like that for so many of us. But there are things we can do, and I have you know, a fundamental belief in the potential of people to do amazing things. You know, we all have unending potential, and so, you know, in a Vuca world, if we can, you know, boil this down into just 4 things, you know, hold the vision, seek out knowledge, simplify where you can, and have a plan B, would be my best advice going forward. So with that, I think we have at least 3 questions, don't we, Joss? So shall I just deal with those now?
Absolutely. Yep. Would you like me to read those out to you one at a time?
Yes, why not? Yes, yeah.
Fabulous. So we've got a couple of votes actually on this question. How do we create effective but flexible assurance of projects in a Vuca world?
Okay. So I guess I would start by saying, so when we talk about assurance, for me, assurance is about providing confidence for stakeholders. So, you know, how do we do that effectively in a VUCA world? I think for me, you know, part of it is so much of our assurance, and it goes for our reporting in projects as well, is looking backwards. And we need to do that because we've got plans and we need to report progress and we need to say how much money we've spent. And we need, part of giving confidence is about looking back and saying, well, you know, are they doing what they said they'd do? And so I'm not negating the need to do that. But for me, a part of assurance that's often you know, not as obvious is that look forward. And in a VUCA world, you know, whether you call it horizon scanning or scenario planning or, you know, looking for weak signals, there's an element of saying, you know, we're here, this is what we plan to do, we look back, but also what's happening now, what's changing in that context, and how can we provide assurance that the project is thinking about those things too. So I think that's perhaps not, you know, what many stakeholders would perhaps, you know, think of historically as being assurance. But for me, if assurance is providing confidence, then we've got to look back and we've got to look forward in designing our assurance activities.
Absolutely, thank you. And it's that element, isn't it, of flexibility, but also remembering your contingency as you go along.
Yes.
So the next question we have is, how do we ensure consistency in quality and successful delivery whilst being flexible to fit the needs of the project, programme or portfolio? And how do we ensure our people are equipped to select and execute the most appropriate method?
Okay, so there's two things there. So the first bit was about consistency and quality, yes?
Yep, quality and successful delivery.
Yes,
Whilst being flexible.
Equipping people to, okay.
Yep.
So it's all coming one. So it's posed as one question. I think it's two, isn't it? But I'm assuming that the person who wrote it thinks they're linked, and I'm going to link them also. Consistency and quality delivery, I mean, for me is again about just helping people to be really clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve and what are the givens and what are the tradables. I think that often, my experience would be that people can take their eye off the ball with quality delivery because they're getting mixed messages and start and feel that, going faster might be more important, or minimizing cost might be more important. And of course, for the project leader, you've got to balance all of those things. But if we want our teams to consistently deliver quality, then I think that it's really important that we make it clear that that's what's important, and that we empower them to actually do that, and not leave our team members confused about what the priority is. Would be and I think that that comes back to equipping people to make wise choices. And in some ways I'm going to maybe contradict myself here, because we don't want every individual in the team going around making what they think is a wise choice. There needs to be a wise choice for the project that then people can understand and align behind within the team. But how do we equip people to do that? I think some of it is some of it is education. Some of it is about people following individual learning paths, and that might be studying for exams and doing accreditations. And obviously, and I would say this, I think it's you know, amazing that now we've got a chartered profession for, you know, through APM and all sorts of opportunities for people to do things there. But actually competent individuals on their own are no good, because they need to be part of competent teams, and they need to be part of competent governance, if you like, of that particular project. So, you know, I think there's an element of education, but you know, within a particular project, for me, it's about just getting real alignment and clarity of the team about what you're trying to do. Back to that holding the vision, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. That was great. Thank you. Next one we've got for you is another wordy one, so bear with me. How do you feel about organisations taking bits from a number of approaches, so agile, Prince, etc., and creating their own bespoke project lifecycle methodologies with concepts from all, rather than using the project methodologies separately or in multi-modular approach?
Okay, so my view would be that your own bespoke methods are fine, good, like why not? You know, certainly organisations need to devise things that are going to work in their context, that might, you know, need to work within the particular challenges of the organisation and its corporate governance. And so I'm all for tailoring and mixing and matching. I guess the watch out would be, what you don't want to do is have to have a single bespoke method that then becomes a one size fits all for all the work in all the portfolios within that organisation. So I actually believe that there isn't one book you can buy or one set of exams you can take that gives you all the answers. There are really good bits in lots of them that you might want to mix and match. But I think the real challenge for people who and in large organisations like yours, where you obviously need some in-house guidance about how to do things, is to make it as flexible as possible. So depending on what the project is, that it's not being forced into, a particular way forward. And for me, there are others who would say, that this is not a very maybe trendy thing to say, but fundamentally, investments in projects need decision making in a structured way. So actually, structured decision gates, with real clarity about what it's going to take to move from, one phase or stage to another. So, a nice linear structure to it. You might do all sorts of you might use all sorts of techniques between that, but the drumbeat of the decision making to make sure that the money's been invested in the right way and is delivering the right value, social value as well as economic value, is the most important thing. So I'd say, yeah, mix and match all you like, but don't force all your projects into a one size fits all method.
Great answer, thank you. So like with many things, have a sort of toolkit or catalogue of things that you can just dip in and out of.
I think so, yeah.
As and when required.
Educate people to use it. That's what I do.
Great stuff, thank you. I think we can squeeze in a couple more. So the next one we have for you is, how do we communicate the impact of Vuca, as its intangibility is hard to articulate?
That's a really great question. And I guess, what one way is to try and make it tangible. And I guess, that's where, thinking about, each element of it in isolation can help communicate aspects of it. So, if you've got lots of volatility, you've got a change in context, the goalposts are moving, then you know, there's ways of dealing that through a change control process maybe, or, you know, different ways of communicating that things are changing, that you have volatility. Obviously the uncertainty, you know, then, you know, risk management is close to my heart. I think that organisations don't always do it very well for all sorts of good reasons, but the more we can just seek out that knowledge and talk about uncertainty and try and make it as well as defined as possible, you know, is a good thing. So we've got our risk processes to communicate that. And, you know, complexity, again, you know, I'm experimenting with different ways of dealing with complexity in organisations. So there are a few methods around there, but again, I think sometimes we try to make things simple and we communicate relationships. So let's take stakeholder analysis, you know, and we've got complex webs of stakeholders and relationships, yet we try and communicate that in a 2x2 grid. You know, so I think the more that we can use systems thinking and show, you know, networks of relationships, whether that's of stakeholder relationships or relationships between risks or relationships between other aspects of complexity, that can also be quite useful, just to visually communicate that this is not simple and we can't just box it in. And try and get some more understanding of some of that with our stakeholders and decision makers. So, you know, maybe the answer to that intangibility is to pick it apart and just use some of our toolkits and approaches to try and communicate, you know, communicate Vuca as tangibly as we possibly can.
Excellent, thank you. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we've got for this session today. We will follow up on all the questions that have been posed with Ruth so that we can get answers back to you, and we'll share those accordingly. But from me, I would say a big thank you to you, Dr. Ruth Murray Webster, for joining us for this session today. It's been really insightful and interesting. And of course, good engagement from attendees. And thank you also to all of our attendees for joining us today. We'll be back early again tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock start, for another day full of exciting and interesting sessions for you to join. So thank you very much. Enjoy your evenings, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.